Rainforest by Jenny Diskey, Paper 1 Practice. Lesson objectives: to read a passage from Rainforest by Jenny Diskey from 1987 and to answer reading questions 1 to 4. This passage is about a woman's recollections of her time working in a rainforest. Bornean rainforest is located in Borneo in Southeast Asia. That's an island. And this is a typical tree that you might see there with these big buttress roots. You can tell it's a rainforest tree because of these roots which help it stand up. Its roots are very shallow and it can fall down easily, so it needs these big roots to help it stand. This is a clouded leopard on the left, which is like a jaguar from South America, and a hornbill on the right, which is like a toucan from South America, and these will be accompanying us on our journey to the rainforest today. Paper 1 Practice, Rainforest by Jenny Diskey, 1987. A cleaner has a dream about the rainforest research she used to do in a previous career. I had another dream last night, a forest dream. I was back in the forest working on my project, checking over the information I'd gathered that day, collating it. I sat in my tent in the clearing, bent over the figures, and felt the sweat running in droplets down my back and from my armpits. My scalp itched with the heat and damp. It was quite real, like it was, until I looked up from my notebooks, suddenly aware that something was wrong, and saw that the tent had disappeared. No tent, no desk, nothing. I was alone, standing in the tiny clearing surrounded by the edges of the forest. All around me, tree trunks soared 150 feet into the air, massive vertical columns disappearing into the dense, deep green, light-defying gloom overhead. I stood in the perpetual greenish twilight and felt fear rise and spread, creeping within me like the lianas that were everywhere, twisted and snaked around themselves and anything in their way. I heard the sounds of the forest, the normal sounds of monkeys screeching, birds hooting and crying. The noise of movement, sudden and swift in the canopy, branches cracking, leaves rustling, the long rasping sound of things creeping, sliding, scuttling below on the forest floor, and always the incessant mechanical soaring of the cicadas and the wailing frogs. Noises I'd lived with for months, but now I stood alone and the clearing seemed to shrink as the sound expanded. The forest closed in on me, and suddenly the noises weren't the ordinary or extraordinary sounds of the forest, alive and separate, but speech. The howling and screeching and rustling and the rhythm of the cicadas were talking to me, but in no language I could understand. The forest intended me to listen to its gibberish, required me to hear it and receive its incomprehensible message. I knew each separate sound was meant for me, had a meaning, but the sounds confused and reverberated on each other until there was nothing but mad noise, and I began to scream against it, to be released from it. There was now no more than an arm's width between myself and the trees surrounding me, as they encroached further without seeming to move at all. I panicked in the dismal twilight and heard my scream mingle with the chattering of the forest, and I fell on my knees, crying out, "I can't hear you! I don't understand! Please leave me alone!" And as ever, I woke then, soaked in the twisted sheets of my bed from the sweating and the sobbing, and as ever, it took me a moment to understand in the darkness that my room was my room and not the forest trees, retreating from my fear and confusion. Question 1. Read again lines 2 to 14. List 4 things about what the character feels in the dream. 4 marks. Question 2. Read again lines 15 to 21 of the text. How does the writer use language to describe the sounds of the forest? 8 marks. Here are some hints and tips. For question 1, make sure you're writing down what the character feels, not what she can see or anything else that's happening. For question 2, look at, first of all, the semantic field. What kind of words are being used and what tone does that give? What feeling does that give you? Also look for language techniques. Use the PETA structure. What point is the writer trying to make? What evidence is there for that? So use quotations. For the quotations, can you name any part of speech or language technique that the writer is using? And lastly, develop the idea that you said in the point at the beginning of the paragraph to make outside references or further develop using synonyms the idea that the writer is trying to portray. Question 3. You now need to think about the whole of the source. The text is from near the beginning of a novel. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? You could write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning of the source, how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops, and any other structural features that interest you. 8 marks. This is sometimes regarded as the hardest question, and it's the one most often left out. But here's a hint about this one. Have a look at what senses the character is using in the different paragraphs. Do the senses change from one paragraph to another, for example, from sound to sight or touch? Also, look at any structural techniques which you will have in your English information list and see if the writer uses those at all. Question 4. Focus this part of your answer on the last part of the source from line 22 to the end. A student said, "This part of the story shows that she has been traumatized by her work in the forest." To what extent do you agree? In your response, you could consider what the author writes about the character's thoughts, evaluate how the writer expresses the mood of the character, and support your answer with references to the text. 20 marks. Here are some hints for question 4. Once again, you're going to use the PETA technique: point, evidence, that's quotation, language techniques, and analysis. Consider what the author writes about the character's thoughts. What is the character thinking? And then what you need to do is try and establish the mood and further detail that the writer is trying to get you to understand by their use of language and structure. Don't forget to use quotations and name any language techniques or parts of speech that you can. Your answer will be judged on its depth of analysis, not on its length. If you manage to say something quite insightful and observant twice, then you will have definitely managed to reach a pass standard for this question.